There is a bird outside your window right now who already knows your face. Not your silhouette, not your general shape. Your face, the specific arrangement of your features, the way you move, the rhythm of when you appear and when you don't. It has been watching you longer than you've been watching it, and it has already decided what kind of person you are. Most people go their whole lives without knowing this is happening. Today, that changes. The first morning you put out a feeder, nothing seems to happen. The yard looks the same. The branches are empty. You wait a few minutes, feel slightly foolish, and go back inside. But here is what you couldn't see from your window. Within the hour, something was already moving toward your yard that would not stop for years. Scout birds arrive first. They don't eat immediately. That would be reckless. Instead, they do something that researchers have only recently begun to fully understand. They conduct a threat assessment. They measure sight lines. They test distances from cover. They watch the windows. They watch you. And before they leave, they communicate. Not in a vague, generalized way, with specific, encoded signals that carry real information about what they found, including the human attached to the feeder. Within 48 hours, your yard has been mapped, filed, and shared across a network you didn't know existed. By day 3, you have regulars. And somewhere in the branches just out of sight, a consensus has already formed about who you are. Now here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Researchers at Cambridge ran an experiment that most people, when they hear about it, go very quiet. They wanted to know whether wild birds could distinguish between individual human faces, not uniforms, not body shapes, but faces. So they sent different people to the same feeders wearing different masks. What they found was not what they expected. The birds didn't just notice the difference, they remembered it. Across weeks, across months, across entire seasons. A bird that had been approached by a threatening mask in February behaved with heightened alarm toward that specific face in October, while remaining completely calm around the other researchers. It wasn't a flock-wide response. It was personal. The bird returning to your feeder tomorrow morning has a file on you. It knows your usual time. It knows your pace. It knows whether you look directly at it or give it space. It has been building a psychological profile of you since the first day you appeared, and that profile gets more detailed every single morning you show up, which means something strange has already happened without you noticing. You have become a known figure in a world that runs completely parallel to yours, one that operates in your garden, above your roof, through the trees of your street. And that world has been exchanging information about you this entire time. But what changed in the birds, not just their behavior, their actual bodies, is where the story takes a turn nobody expects. Scientists in Exeter tracked wild garden birds through an entire winter, splitting them into 2 groups, those with reliable feeders and those without. The results were predictable at first. The fed birds survived better. But then they looked at the stress hormone levels. The fed birds didn't just have more food. They had measurably calmer nervous systems, lower cortisol, more regulated biology. And when spring came and the feeders were removed, the effect didn't vanish. It lingered in the birds' bodies like a memory written in chemistry. Something about the reliability, the simple fact that a human showed up every day without fail, had done something to their physiology that food alone couldn't explain. Security had changed them at a biological level. Your consistency had done that, not your feeder. You. And then the crows entered the story, and everything shifted again. In Seattle, a girl named Gabby Mann started feeding the crows near her home when she was 4 years old. Accidental drops from her lunchbox at first, then deliberate offerings. Then, by the time she was 8, a full daily ritual, peanuts, placed carefully, every morning without exception. The crows noticed the consistency. They always do. But what happened next is the part that scientists still argue about in careful, hedged language, because the straightforward explanation is too strange to say plainly. The crows started leaving things for her. Not garbage. Chosen objects. A button. A polished piece of blue glass. A small metal heart. Items placed precisely where the food had been, as though completing a transaction, as though they understood that something was being exchanged, not just consumed. Gabi's mother kept a spreadsheet. Over years, dozens of objects accumulated. Ornithologists who visited described the behavior in the most cautious scientific terms possible. But Gabi, who was 12 by then, put it more simply. They're my friends. They bring me things because I bring them things. That's just what friends do. The scientists couldn't technically argue with that. What was happening in Gabi's yard was something older than any framework we use to understand it. A relationship, genuine, reciprocal, maintained over years between a human child and a group of wild birds. And it raises a question that once you hear it, you cannot unhear. If the crows were doing this for Gabi, what are the birds in your yard doing that you haven't noticed yet? Because here's what the research on corvids has quietly established. Crows and jays have been documented positioning themselves near the homes of people who feed them when threats appear, dive-bombing cats that wander too close, issuing specific alarm calls directed at particular windows, behaving in ways that have been filmed and studied and reluctantly published, like they are watching out for someone, not the feeder, the person connected to the feeder. At some point, without a single word spoken, you became part of their social world. And social worlds for birds are not casual things. Now pull back further, because your yard is not an isolated point. It is a node. The acoustic environment of your neighborhood, the sound world that exists at a frequency you move through every day without consciously hearing, is a live, real-time communication system that has been running continuously since long before the first house on your street was built. Birds encode information in ways that would take a human linguist years to fully map. Chickadees vary the number of repeated notes in an alarm call to communicate the exact size of a predator. A single D at the end means small, agile threat, maximum danger. Multiple Ds means large, slow threat, less urgent. Other species from completely different families decode these signals in real time and respond accordingly. When a hawk crosses your yard this afternoon, the response won't be chaos. It will be coordinated, calibrated. Birds 2 gardens away will flatten against their branches before they've even seen the hawk, because a signal reached them first. And when it passes, an all-clear will roll back through the neighborhood. Soft, deliberate, almost conversational, and the world will resume. You have been living inside this system your entire life. You just weren't aware you had a role in it. Now you do. Your feeder changed that. Your presence in that network is now a data point that other birds factor into their decisions. A known quantity in an information system that never sleeps and never stops. And what that system does to you, to your mind, to your nervous system, to the specific texture of your days, is something that took scientists embarrassingly long to measure, because the effect was so obvious that nobody thought to study it. In 2017, a large-scale study tracked thousands of people across multiple regions and looked for the strongest predictors of daily psychological well-being. They controlled for income, social connection, health, weather. And the single most consistent predictor, the variable that kept rising to the top regardless of every other factor, was the presence of birds. Not owning birds, not being a bird watcher, just being in a place where birds could be seen and heard. People who lived with more birds around them reported lower anxiety, lower depression, and a quality of daily attention that the researchers described as restored, as though something that modern life continuously depletes was being continuously refilled. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but attention researchers have a framework for it: soft fascination. It is the particular state your mind enters when something in the environment holds your attention effortlessly, without demand, without effort, without the friction that conscious focused work requires. Birds are almost perfectly engineered to produce this state. They are unpredictable enough to keep you present, beautiful enough to keep you still, and just alive enough, just wild enough, to remind some part of your nervous system of something it already knew and had almost forgotten. Every morning you stand at that window, you are not just watching birds. Something in you is being quietly repaired. But there is a final layer to this, the one that, once you understand it, changes the way you think about what a feeder even is. When a wild bird learns that your yard is safe, not just food available, but genuinely safe, the kind of safe that only comes from a human who shows up without fail and moves without threat, that knowledge enters a transmission system that operates across generations. Young birds learn foraging territories not just by exploring but by watching. They follow experienced adults. They pay attention to where those adults feel safe enough to drop their guard. If your yard has been reliably maintained for years, the birds raising young in your neighborhood right now are teaching those fledglings about your yard before they've ever visited it themselves. Your yard's reputation is already moving through minds you will never see, attached to wings you will never recognize. In some documented territories, specific feeding locations have carried cultural significance across multiple generations of birds, the knowledge of that place outlasting every individual bird who ever held it. The place remembered, even after every creature who originally learned it is gone. If you have been feeding birds for years, you have already started this. Something about your yard, about your reliability, your presence, the particular quality of the safety you created is already in motion through a living chain of transmission that will continue after you stop, after you move, after you're gone. Small, wild minds passing something forward that began with you, in a language you never spoke, toward creatures you will never meet. Go back to that first morning, the empty feeder, the ordinary yard, the feeling of doing something small and slightly uncertain, without knowing where it would go. You didn't know you were starting a relationship. You didn't know that something out there would file your face in memory and share it through a network older than your neighborhood. You didn't know that your consistency would write itself into the biology of creatures who couldn't even name you. You didn't know that the silence outside your window was already a conversation, and that putting out that feeder was, in the language of that conversation, an introduction. But the birds knew. They always do. And tomorrow morning, when you walk to that window and they're already there, waiting, watching, tilting their heads in that way, that now feels less like animal reflex and more like recognition, you'll feel it. The weight of what has quietly been built. The strange, real, ancient thing that exists between you and the wild world just outside your glass. You were never just feeding birds. You are being known by something that was here long before you and will carry the memory of you long after. Have you ever had a moment, at a feeder, on a walk, anywhere, where a bird looked at you and something felt different, like it wasn't random? Tell me what happened. I want to know.